guess what was your inspiration to make the film, Alanis?
Yes. And the first big reason was that, first of all, we had a lot of people on the street in Montreal, and we were fighting hard to get a women's shelter built. And the city kept promising, but nothing was happening. And then we came to a fall one year, and I said, I'm not taking on another winter without a place for our people, for especially the women who were sleeping on the street. And there's when I made the film, when the film was ready to come out, I think it was 1988, I'm not sure. I asked permission to the film board to do a premiere and charge $50 a ticket for them to come and see the film. And it was to raise money for the shelter. So we did it in a center on Côte des Neiges here, right downtown Montreal. And I did charge $50. Plus, I had many artists that I knew. I asked them to donate something for us to auction to get more money, hoping to build this shelter. So when the premiere of No Address came in Montreal, we did it in this center. We charged $50, and I had the best auctioneer man in Montreal to come in to auction the artwork that we had. And we made $10,000 in one night. So I was very happy. This was the reason and how I presented the film when it first came out. It was really to raise money. And a lot of the people that were in the film were present at this premiere. So I don't know if you can imagine, it was a very, very moving experience to see themselves and to have an opinion on how they were presented and how they felt. It was really quite special. And as many years went by, as you see in the film, the city, the mayor had made a statement that anybody who were on the street or who needed help, financial help, or for street people, that whenever they went to the city, they would never refuse that they would get some help. And if you remember, there's a sequence in there where Thomas C. goes to, we filmed him at one of the office, and he asked for help. And the woman said, do you have an address? He says, no, I live on the street. But she said, you can't get any help. You have to have an address. So it was false for them to say that they were helping everybody, no matter whether they had an address or not. And they used the Friendship Center used that particular sequence. They went to the city, and again, when there was a debate and people saying, oh, people on the street have help, and so they proved to them that it wasn't true. And from then on, they allowed the street people to use the Friendship Center's address to get help, financial help. So, some of them could perhaps rent a room or eat or whatever it was. So the film itself was very useful to force changes. And that was the main reason why I did the film. When I'm talking to people, I always tell them, if you feel sorry that you said certain things, if you say to yourself, oh my God, everybody's going to know about me, tell me. And I erase the material or I'm not using it. And I would never come back on my word. So they didn't have to worry about that. It can be very difficult for anyone to tell all their problems in front of a group of people, although they're all having terrible problems. But for some, it's very hard for them to live with the fact that they told their stories. And you have to allow that to be, that if a person changed their minds, it's okay. Don't make them feel that they're letting you down or whatever. You have to be yourself, really listening. You have to be patient, and you have to love the people. And it's okay if you say, oh my God, I was going to use this in the film, and you can't stand it, you're in trouble. Because it's not your film. It's the story of someone else. And that person should be allowed to feel free and to feel, to have confidence in talking to sometimes strangers they don't know at all. So I always tell them, I don't want them to feel worried. And I tell them, to change your mind, there's no problem.
As a storyteller, did you go in with like a story, and then as you went through the interviews, did it change anything, or how was that process for you?
Yeah, well, my process is that I'm always listening. It's not me who's telling my story or who's want to talk, and I don't question them 10 times because I want them to give me a certain answer. That's awful. Also, of course, I'm talking about documentary filmmaking now. I'm not talking about fiction. Fiction is totally outside of that. You can say what you want. You can ask people to behave a certain way or to look a certain way, all those things, but not in documentary. And you have to respect that. And it's people's life. It's their story. It's sacred.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I had one. I'm just wondering, you talked a little bit about, the difficult subjects or just the nature of your conversations. How did you find taking care of yourself, in those moments where you say you're getting a little bit emotional or we're dealing with the hard conversations, you're getting to know the people.
Yeah.
How did you take care of yourself, like mentally and emotionally? Like, I imagine that takes an incredible amount of strength. So I think
it's not easy. It's very, very difficult. I've been in very dangerous places, from inside of myself or with the army, with the police, many of the films I made were not easy films to make. And you're in danger. Anything can happen. You have to make up your mind. This is the kind of work I'm doing. Am I going to run away from this? But it's not easy. But it's so, by the time you get into the theater, you're doing your mix, you put the film together, and when it's such a gift to finish a film and to hear and see and all the people, it's extraordinary for me anyway.
I guess I'm just asking about that prep beforehand, especially if working with, homeless people or people that just have those tougher stories.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not easy. It's difficult. You go home and you feel bad about these stories, and and you learn a lot about the history. Like, there's still a lot of Inuit people in Montreal, and there was quite a few in those days. And I'll never forget, there was one woman, her children were taken, to welfare. But she was telling me that she had a son, and he was in Montreal. And I asked her, I would love to meet him, when she gets him for a couple of days, which I did. There was a horrible history in her community. Like, a lot of the people had dogs, like to travel. And her son, they had a dog, and the RCMP came and shot all the dogs in the community. This is years ago. They did this to a lot of people. And her boy had such a shock that he lost all his hair. It never grew again, totally. And because he was so upset when they killed his dog, that and that's the way it was for the rest of his life. And I got to meet him. He was just such a beautiful child. When I met him, I think he might have been 10 or something like that. And I never saw him again. And one time I was doing a lecture someplace in Montreal, and I was so upset because somebody said, oh, there's a young man who came on his bicycle from the area, it was still in the same area outside of Montreal, to see you. And it was him, and I missed it. Oh my God, I would have just loved to see him again. There's things like that, it's so disappointing. And you know, documentary filmmaking is very powerful. When I made another film, I don't know if any of you have seen it, it's called Richard Cardinal, Cry from a Métis Child. He committed suicide when he was 17. He had gone to 28 foster homes in his lifetime. And it's only a half-hour-long film that I made. I think it must have been before No Address. Anyway, that film is only a half-hour long, and it helped to influence changes in terms of law. And this film was made in Alberta. And up until then, they had a lot of children who became the wards of the government. And in Alberta, it was quite high. I forget that it was 12,000 Indigenous people who were under that system. And the thing was, like, if a social worker would come into a community and she'd see problems, maybe whatever the problems are, and the children are not taken well care of, and so they would pick the children up and take them away, and often the parents never saw them again. And they would sometimes get them to be adopted in another country, or sometimes in Canada. But our own people never qualified to take on children in those days. They'd say, where is he going to sleep? Do you work? Do you have a steady job? And you should look at that film, because you really see it in that film. You'll see exactly what I'm talking about. And anyway, this film was kind of a scandal, because you see him he hung himself in the last foster home that he was in. He was 17 by then. And when he would turn 18, then the government was no longer responsible, so he would have been on the street, living on the street. And because of the film, that at first I was really put down because we had this picture in it. And I said, well, they created these problems for our children, so they're going to watch it. This is what they've done. And the last foster parents, they were waiting for the police to come, and he was hanging there in a tree 4 hours. Finally, the police come, and they took him down, and they never came to these foster parents to do an enquête, to do, comment on dit ça, une enquête? To find out what happened, why did he hang himself, what was happening to him? Was it these foster parents' fault? They never came to check anything for months. So the foster father, Mr. Crowder, took a picture when Richard was hanging there. So they couldn't believe that nobody came to find out. No investigation, that's the word I was looking for. Nothing. So he sent the picture to a newspaper in Edmonton and to the Métis Association. And that became quite a scandal to have this big picture of Richard hanging there. And I was working there on another film, Palmmaker's Lodge. And I saw this woman being interviewed on television. And she told the story. And I thought, I'm going to go and see these parents. I didn't want them to regret the fact they took him in. And I went to visit them where they were. And I had a long conversation with them. And there were people who were asking for an investigation, and Indian Affairs kept refusing, and or that system. So finally, the journalists were so much at their work. There were articles every day for a long time. Finally, they had to have the investigation, and it was in court for, I forget, maybe 6 or 8 days, and I attended the investigation. And one time I was there and I had to drive back to Edmonton, and the Cruthers said, why don't you sleep here? Go tomorrow. I said, okay, well, I want to sleep in Richard's bed. And it was like in an attic. They had a room there. They had fixed it all up, and that's where he was staying. So I went to bed there, and I was talking to Richard. I said to him, tell me how you felt, like, why did you do that? And I was having a conversation in my mind with him. And I had this horrible dream that I was in a garage someplace. And you know when they repair the cars and they're high up here? And I'm lying down and the car is coming on me. And for me, that was the answer he gave me. That's how he felt. And then I decided to make a film. And I made the film in hiding. Instead of working on one film, I was working on 2 films, but I didn't tell the film board. I didn't want them to know, because they would have said, you can't do that. But that's how I made the film. And it's through centers, people who will have organization and try to help people who are suicidal. Many government agencies have used this film. They're still using it. And this is how it permitted the law to be changed. That if a child was in need of a home, a house, to make sure that it was maybe somebody that is related to this child at the reserve level. If not, if it's in the city, they identify, I think it was like 65 homes where it was all Native people who were ready to help and take in children. So that was the big difference. Instead of being given as a ward of the government and being taken in by anybody in the world. And that was the big change. And it was fantastic. And it's just a half hour long. And it really influenced people who had the power to make the change. And then that's so important.
I guess since you've been there such a long time, have you seen like a growth in Indigenous filmmakers coming through there now? Like from back?
It is. It's amazing, the change. Oh, yes. There's a lot of people that there's a section for Indigenous people. There's on the French side and on the English side also. And the possibilities is there. It's open. And that's what I keep telling young people. If you can listen, if you have respect for whoever you want to work with, this is the time. And that's not only the film board, it's all the institution in Canada. It's a very, very different time where the doors were closed for so many generations. Now it's open. And there are monies and places, especially for our people. Just get yourself together, if you want to make a film, in this case, we're talking about filmmaking, but it's about anything. If you want to be a doctor, if you want to be whatever at the university level, it's open and everything is possible. Don't forget that. I've repeated myself several times. I always do interviews myself with, you have to have a professional tape recorder. You know, in my case, for years I used a Niagara, which was very professional, but it's fantastic. And so it's to hear the story just with words, it could be one person or maybe more than one in a room or whatever, but it's your equipment that's very important. You've got to have very good sound recorders. And then the same thing when you come with a crew, well, again, you're with professional people. You have a camera person, I hope you do, camera person and an assistant. In our case, we were shooting 16 all the time. Now, you know, you're doing video and you have very good quality and it's much easier than it used to be. So when you have a crew, you have to recognize what is your responsibility. First of all, if you're a director, your responsibility is the responsibility of really hearing and know what the story is. Because if as a director, you don't know, you're not sure what the story is, as you go along, technically, you're going to have a producer who's going to take over or an editor who's going to take over. And the story is going to be very different than what you thought, of what you started with. So the responsibility of chaque individual in a crew is very important and to really exercise it. The director must know, you have to direct. You must know what the story is. So don't start shooting until you know what story you're going to be doing. And then once you know, you have a producer. The producer should be able to help you financially, to go get money, to make it possible for this producer to go and visit whatever, whether it's the Film Board, Telefilm Canada, CBC, whatever. That responsibility. But in the past, it was very different. A producer had the last word. So that's very dangerous because you, as a director, might decide to do a story. And then the producer could say in those days, well, I don't like this. I don't want to hear this particular aspect of it. Or I don't want the film to finish like that or to start like that. So the producer had the last word. So you were in trouble right there. You understand? As a director, you didn't have the last word. There's this kind of things, depending on who you're working with, what company you're with. If they tell you that they're going to decide what's going to be in the film, if it was me, I'd say, I'm sorry, I'm not working with you. I'm not making this film. Because I'm the director and I'm also a producer, but I'm the director and I'll decide what's in this film. If you are not strong enough to know what the story is, then you are in trouble all along.
Just a quick one in regards to working with Indigenous languages. If we're working with, say, 2 or 3 or just a multiple, I know like for broadcast, sometimes that's not ideal because they're putting, Cree in one time zone or Ojibwe in one time zone. With all that aside, any advice when it comes to working with Indigenous languages and then, come post when it's the translating aspect?
Yeah, it's very difficult. Like either you do an English version and then you say, well, we're going to do a Cree version. Like I've got quite a few problems here right now because the problem is, let's say you're talking about Cree or Ojibwe. There's different communities and they're not all the same. Although they're speaking Cree, there's the syllabics are different. Maybe they're not using a certain letter. Like I'm a Abenaki woman. In Odanak, they never use the letter R. So whenever there is a letter R, it was replaced by an L. So that gives you a way of speaking of your particular group that you belong to. So even though, if let's say you're doing a Cree version, it's important to work with just one community to do the Cree version. Like I'm in trouble right now because I've got Crees with different syllables, and you know, that's not very nice. And to write that on the screen is, they can't read it. It's the sound for them to hear it that counts. So if depending, like you say, if you have different Indigenous language in one film, I wouldn't do it. One is enough.
When you go out to communities, do you ever find that like you're working with an individual, but then like somehow community leaders like chief and council are like, what are you doing, and trying to get involved?
Yeah. This is why when I come to a community, I always go to the band office. I always ask to meet with the chief, whoever. I tell them exactly what I'm doing, why I'm doing. You also have a problem at the community level. Maybe some people say, oh, if so-and-so is in the film, I don't want to be in it. There's that kind of stuff. So I listen to everybody. But nobody's going to decide who's going to be in the film. But imagine if you came to a community and the chief and the councilors there say, hey, there's a camera here, what are they doing? They never asked us permission, or they never told us what they're doing. I go in and I tell them exactly what I'm doing, who I'm working with. And often I ask them to be helpful to me for all kinds of reasons. And because it's not fair to go to a community and say, oh, I have friends, and they say, well, I never go to the band office. I come in and I wouldn't do that. You know, it's insulting. Like, there's a chief, there's people that are in charge, and you have to give them respect too. Mm-hmm. Yes, you know, I've been in a lot of communities for years and years, even more than 50 years, because before making films, I was singing. And I went to a lot of residential schools in those days, and I went to a lot of schools across the country. I did tours at the prison level. You know, I was told, and they said, oh, did you know that 68% of the prisoners in different prisons in Canada is Native people? And that's when I decided, I said, well, then it means my relatives are in jail, I'm going to go see them. And I did a tour in a lot of prisons. And at the reserve level, there's often different groups who don't talk to each other sometime or put each other down. I don't stand for that. You know, like I would never have in a film, oh, so-and-so is this, and you know, that putting down somebody, no, I'm sorry, but I don't do that. I don't want to hear that. I don't want to make films about that, or, you know, it's like when politicians have to stand up and the only way they can be voted in is by putting somebody else down. I can't stand that. You know, so I respect everybody, and if somebody starts saying, which often happen, talk again against the family, that's fine, but it's not going to be in whatever I'm working in, and it's not going to stop me from. At one time, I was doing a film on women, and 1975 was the year of the women. That's what they were saying, and some Native women at that time, who were saying, asked to meet me. They were working in Ottawa. This must have been like 1973 or 74. And they said, oh, you know, Alanis is going to be the Women's Year. We don't have any films about women. We want you to make a film about a woman, perhaps a well-known Indigenous person that And I said, no, if I think it's important, but if I do a film on women, it's going to be a lot of women. And I would think more from the beginning of life to the end, through as many women as possible, because it's the woman's year. And they all said, oh boy, that's a good idea. And my department are going to have an amount of money to give to Native women. I'm sure we're going to work with you and help you for money. And in those days, the film board gave me zero money. I had to go and raise money, and then they would match what I would raise. And so comes the time I go to Ottawa, I meet this woman, I go to there was 5 different departments. I went to every one of them. He said, oh, I'm so sorry, there's no money, it's all gone. And I remember going to bed, I said, what the hell with it? It's going to be so hard to make, because the way I want to have so many women, it means traveling, it's going to cost a fortune to all the different locations, provinces. So I went to bed and I said, it's off my back, it's going to be too hard anyway. When I got up in the morning, I'm putting my war paint on and I'm saying, who the hell do you think you are? You just gave up because there's no money? And I'm fighting with myself. So I took a bus back to Ottawa. I didn't have a car in those days. And I went, because the law was I could only get money from a federal agency, federal government. And I was going from department to department. Everybody, no money, no money. And I came to one place, and this man was in charge, said, Alanis, all the money is gone. There's only $35,000 left. I said, what? $35,000? You give it to the board, they'll match what I'm got, and we can start the film. And that's how I started Mother of Many Children. I won't name, but I was in a community, and this chief said to me, is so-and-so going to be in the film? I said, yes. He says, well, then I don't want any women of my nation to be in it. So I was very sad. I thought, geez, that's awful. So I had another friend. She said, oh, come and meet my old aunt. And originally, she had come from Hobbema. And when Treaty 6 was signed, her name was on the list. And then she married a Métis who was not registered. So she lost her status. I come there. This is unbelievable. It was summertime, very hot day. So we go to her house where she's living. And there was a screen door. And we knock. And about 4 or 5 children come. And they see me and they go, oh, and they run, And I said, my God, what's wrong with me? So they were watching me on Sesame Street. And when they saw me outside, they thought I was a ghost. How could I be on TV? And how could I be on their porch? It was so funny after when I found out, And then this woman comes and she said, oh, Alanis, we know you. And she goes and get her mother. The woman who came, she was in her pension. She must be in her 70s. She goes and get her mother. She was, I forget whether it's 107 or 108 years old. So I came in and she said, whenever we see you on Sesame Street, she says, we bring her very close to the TV. And she said, she loves your big drum. And they're talking to me as if they knew me. So it's lovely. And so I asked her, I would love to have an interview with you on camera. But I said, and I was talking to her directly. And I said, would you do it? She says, yes. So we made a date for the day that I'm going to do. I came with a crew. And when we came, she was sitting on the ground, and she was a tall, big woman. And she was playing cards with a patient game. And she had a cigarette in her mouth like this here. So she says to me, did you bring me a beer? I said, oh my God. If I had known her, I said, I'll go and buy you a beer. And she was just beautiful. And she gave me an interview. And then we filmed her. She's walking. She's 108 or 107 years old. and her daughter, who's in her 70s, I guess, and a bunch of children. They're all walking with her. And she says this, something like this. She says, when I was very young, you could really hear the birds sing. And we used to hunt the little animals. And she said, and the Creator really had a lot of affection for the woman. And this is why the Creator made sure that she is the mother of many children. That's where I got the title of the film. So beautiful. And there she was, just describing what it was like. And she says, and when a woman speaks, you have to listen. And this is how it's called, Mother of Many Children. It came from that old lady. It's beautiful. And in that film, you meet with a woman who has a baby, an Inuit woman. And they sent her, she was someplace in Arctic country. And they sent her to subarctic country at the time to Moose Factory, because there was a hospital there, to have her baby. And we filmed her when she gave life. And that's the beginning. And you see through, we filmed in prison, in shelters, on the street, in houses, every situation. And it's a very important film. It's a very important story. So you see, often if you're listening, often you'd say, oh my God, this will be a good beginning of the film as you're working. And then maybe you change your mind, something else happened. Or then you see the end. And that's really storytelling. And it comes to you automatically. And besides, we are storytellers for thousands of years, don't you forget it. Didn't happen just because we're making films. Our people are natural storytellers.